Three intimidating bikers confronted a solitary woman at Crossroads Cafe. They thought they had found their entertainment for the evening. Instead, they encountered a decorated Navy SEAL combat medic who would not only change their perspective on life, but inspire a nationwide movement of redemption and healing. What transpired that night would spread across social media like wildfire, launch a groundbreaking veterans rehabilitation program, and prove that sometimes the most profound acts of service happen long after leaving the battlefield. Let's get started, but first, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's incredible tale will leave you speechless. Rachel Cooper sat quietly in her corner table at Crossroads Cafe, the gentle aroma of fresh coffee mingling with the warmth of the setting sun through the window. The small gold trident pin on her leather jacket caught the fading light, the only subtle hint of her 8 years of service as a Navy SEAL combat medic. At 32, her athletic frame and alert posture spoke of someone intimately familiar with combat situations, though nothing in her calm demeanor suggested she was anything more than another customer enjoying a peaceful evening meal. The cozy cafe sat at the intersection of Maple and Pine in the heart of Millbrook, a small town that had seen better days but was slowly finding its way back. Rachel had chosen this spot deliberately, not just for the excellent coffee and quiet atmosphere, but because it gave her a clear view of both entrances and the entire dining area. Old habits die hard, even 3 years after hanging up her uniform. "Here's your usual, Rachel," said Linda, the cafe's veteran waitress of 15 years, refreshing her coffee cup. The motherly server had taken Rachel under her wing since she'd started coming here 6 months ago. Her silver-streaked hair and warm smile had become as much a part of Crossroads as the vintage photos lining its walls. "How's the new trauma center coming along?" "Slowly but surely," Rachel replied, stirring her coffee. "Got 3 new nurses starting tomorrow. They've got good hearts, just need some guidance." She glanced at the small notebook beside her cup, filled with training protocols and rehabilitation programs she was developing. After leaving the service, Rachel had dedicated herself to establishing Millbrook's first comprehensive trauma care center, focusing on both physical and psychological healing. "Still can't believe you never mentioned being a SEAL all these months." Linda shook her head with a smile, sliding into the booth across from Rachel for her customary evening chat. "First female combat medic in your unit, from what I heard. Deputy Mayor Richards was in here this morning, couldn't stop talking about the grant you secured for the center." "Some things are better left quiet," Rachel said softly, her fingers unconsciously tracing the outline of the trident pin. "That chapter's behind me now. This is where I'm needed." Her mind briefly flashed to the faces of her former unit members, especially those who hadn't made it home. The trauma center was her way of honoring their memory, of continuing to serve, just in a different uniform. The evening crowd at Crossroads was starting to filter in, mostly regulars whom Rachel had come to know by sight, if not by name. Mr. Peterson, the high school history teacher, grading papers at his usual table by the window. The Chen family, whose daughter had recently started volunteering at the trauma center, sharing a plate of Linda's famous apple pie. A young veteran Rachel recognized from the VA hospital, finally venturing out in public again after months of isolation. Through the window, Rachel watched as Main Street streetlights flickered to life, casting a warm glow over the town square. Millbrook had been hit hard by the economic downturn, but there were signs of revival. The trauma center was part of that, not just helping people heal, but bringing jobs and hope back to the community. "You should have seen her in action last week," Linda was telling another regular customer, despite Rachel's attempted protests. Young kid came in having a panic attack, everyone else frozen, but Rachel just knew exactly what to do. Calm as could be, got him breathing normal in minutes. That's the kind of experience you can't teach. Rachel smiled slightly, remembering the incident. The young man had been a former Marine, triggered by a car backfiring outside. She'd recognized the look in his eyes, the same one she'd seen countless times in the field. Sometimes the deepest wounds weren't the ones you could bandage. "The center's starting to make a real difference," Rachel admitted, pulling out her tablet to show Linda some photos. "We're not just treating injuries anymore. We're building a community. Got a music therapy program starting next month, art classes for PTSD patients, even a garden project for physical rehabilitation. Linda beamed with pride, as if Rachel's accomplishments were her own. In many ways they were. The waitress had been the first person in Millbrook to really welcome Rachel, to help her feel like she belonged somewhere again after leaving the service. "Oh, meant to tell you." Linda lowered her voice, leaning in closer. "Those bikers that were causing trouble over in Riverdale last week? Heard they might be heading this way. Sheriff Martinez asked us to keep an eye out." Rachel nodded, her tactical mind automatically calculating response scenarios. The town's small police force was already stretched thin, and the nearest state trooper station was 40 minutes away. But Millbrook had been peaceful for months, and she wasn't about to let anyone disturb that peace. A young family walked in, mother, father, and 2 small children. Rachel watched as they settled into a booth near the door, the kids excitedly discussing their first day of school. The sight brought a mix of emotions, warmth at their obvious happiness, and a touch of sadness for the family life her career choices had postponed. "You ever think about settling down?" Linda asked, following Rachel's gaze. "That nice doctor from the hospital's been asking about you." Rachel chuckled, shaking her head. "Got my hands full with the center right now. Besides," she gestured to her notebook, "these are my kids. Every patient who walks through those doors looking for a second chance." The cafe's ancient radio played soft jazz, mixing with the comfortable murmur of conversation and the clink of coffee cups. Rachel checked her watch, almost time for her evening rounds at the center. She had a group therapy session to prepare for tomorrow, and a meeting with potential donors who might help expand their programs. "You know what I love about this place?" Rachel said suddenly, surprising herself with the admission. "It reminds me of our field hospital in Kandahar. Not the chaos or the trauma, but the sense of purpose. Everyone working together, helping people put themselves back together, piece by piece." Linda reached across the table, squeezing Rachel's hand. "Well, we're glad you found your way here. Millbrook needed someone like you, even if we didn't know it." The sun had almost set now, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Rachel gathered her notes, preparing to head out, when the cafe's bell chimed sharply. The door swung open, letting in a gust of cool evening air and 3 figures that would change everything. The atmosphere in Crossroads Cafe shifted instantly as 3 imposing figures filled the doorway. Their leather cuts bore the insignia of the Iron Wolves, a motorcycle club known more for their brutality than their brotherhood. Their leader, a hulking man known as Spike, had to turn sideways to fit his broad shoulders through the doorframe. Rachel's trained eye took in the details automatically. Spike, approximately 6 feet 4 inches, 260 pounds, martial arts stance suggesting former boxer or street fighter. His second, a lean man with a jagged scar running down his neck, kept his right hand suspiciously close to his jacket pocket. The third, younger and visibly twitchy, scanned the cafe with predatory eyes. "Well, what do we have here?" Spike's gravelly voice carried across the quiet cafe. "Looks like we found ourselves a real friendly little spot." His boots left muddy prints on the freshly mopped floor as he moved further inside, deliberately taking up more space than necessary. Linda shot Rachel a worried glance before approaching the men, her professional smile firmly in place. "Welcome to Crossroads, table for 3? "Oh, we'll seat ourselves, sweetheart," Spike grinned, revealing a gold tooth. "Seems like everyone here could use some entertainment tonight." The scar-faced man snickered, already moving toward the young family's table. Rachel watched the scene unfold in the window's reflection, her coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. The father at the family's table was already reaching for his wallet, trying to hustle his children out quietly. His wife's hands trembled as she gathered their belongings. "Hey, sugar," the youngest biker called out to Jenny, the teenage waitress who had just started last week. "Looks like you spilled something." He knocked over a glass of water, sending it crashing to the floor. "Better clean that up real slow-like." Jenny froze, her eyes downcast, clutching her serving tray like a shield. Mr. Peterson had half risen from his seat, his face flushed with anger, but uncertainty kept him in place. The Chen family huddled closer together, trying to make themselves invisible. "What's wrong with the kid?" Spike laughed, turning toward the sound of a child's whimper. Maybe Mommy and Daddy need some company to help them relax? The father pulled his children behind him, backing toward the door. The cafe had gone deathly quiet, the only sounds the hum of the overhead fans and the sharp tap of Spike's boots as he moved between the tables, enjoying the fear he created. Linda had disappeared into the kitchen, hopefully calling the police, though Rachel knew response times in Millbrook were painfully slow. "The lady and her family are leaving?" Rachel's voice cut through the tension, calm and clear. "Step aside." The cafe seemed to hold its breath. Spike turned slowly, his eyes finding Rachel in her corner booth. The predatory grin spread wider across his face. "Well, look what we got here, boys. Seems like someone forgot their manners." Rachel remained seated, one hand resting lightly on her coffee cup. Her posture was relaxed, but any trained observer would recognize the coiled energy she held in check. "Actually, I learned my manners in BUD/training. 8 years as a Navy SEAL combat medic tends to teach you a thing or two about respect." Spike's laugh was forced, uncertainty flickering in his eyes as he took in Rachel's confident stance. "Navy SEAL?" "Right. And I'm the Queen of England. Listen, lady, you don't want to get involved in this." "Already involved," Rachel replied evenly, her eyes never leaving Spike's face. "The moment you threatened these people, it became my business." The young family had managed to slip out during the exchange, the mother mouthing a silent thank you as they hurried through the door. The scar-faced man moved closer, his hand now clearly gripping something in his pocket. "You know what happens to people who get in our way?" "Actually, I do," Rachel said, finally standing. She moved with fluid grace, positioning herself between the bikers and the remaining customers. "But the real question is, do you know what happens when you threaten a Navy SEAL who spent years patching up the results of men like you?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Spike's face darkened. "Last chance to mind your own business, lady." "Protecting civilians is my business," Rachel stated firmly. 15 years of military service didn't end when I took off the uniform, just like my oath to protect others didn't expire when I left the teams. The cafe's kitchen door swung open as Linda emerged, phone clutched in her hand. Rachel calculated response times, 7 minutes minimum for the first patrol car to arrive. The young biker had moved to block the main entrance, while Scarface edged toward the side door. "You must be new to Millbrook," Rachel continued, her voice still measured and calm. "This town's been through enough. We're building something good here. I won't let you destroy that." "Building something?" Spike sneered. "Lady, you don't know what destruction looks like." He took a menacing step forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the nearest table. Rachel didn't flinch. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. I've seen more destruction than you can imagine. That's why I recognize something worth protecting when I see it." The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Mr. Peterson had quietly helped Jenny move behind the counter. The Chen family was inching toward the kitchen. Through the window, Rachel could see Linda's call had worked. Lights were going on in neighboring businesses as the community responded to trouble at their beloved cafe. "Get her," Spike growled to his companions, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice now. He had come expecting to terrorize a quiet cafe. Instead, he had found something he didn't understand. A warrior who had traded one kind of battlefield for another, but who was no less deadly for the change. As the bikers moved to surround her, Rachel allowed herself a small, confident smile. She hadn't started this fight, but she was about to demonstrate why you don't challenge a Navy SEAL in the wrong cafe at the wrong time. The next few minutes would not only change these men's lives, but would spark a movement that would transform an entire community. The scar-faced biker moved first, lunging forward in an attempt to grab Rachel's arm. His movements were telegraphed, amateur, nothing like the trained fighters she'd faced in combat. Rachel stepped smoothly aside, using his momentum to send him crashing into an empty table. Dishes clattered to the floor as he sprawled, cursing. Spike charged forward, his massive frame moving with surprising speed. His right hook whistled through the air where Rachel's head had been a split second before. She ducked under his swing, years of training taking over as she redirected his momentum. The big man stumbled, caught off guard by her skill. "Last chance," Rachel said calmly, maintaining her defensive stance. "Walk away now and we can forget this happened." "Nobody makes a fool of the Iron Wolves," Spike roared, his face reddening with rage. He reached into his cut, and Rachel caught the glint of brass knuckles as he slipped them onto his fingers. "Actually," Rachel replied, her voice still steady, "you're doing that just fine on your own." The youngest biker, who had been blocking the door, looked increasingly uncertain. His eyes darted between his fallen companion, his enraged leader, and the composed woman who stood between them and the cafe's terrified patrons. Through the window, Rachel could see people gathering outside. Millbrook might be a small town, but it took care of its own. Mr. Chen had managed to slip out through the kitchen and was now directing approaching police officers to the scene. Spike lunged again, brass knuckles glinting in the cafe's fluorescent lights. Rachel moved like water, her movements fluid and precise. She caught his arm, used his own weight against him, and suddenly the biker leader found himself face down on the cafe floor, his arm locked behind him in a hold that sent waves of pain shooting through his shoulder. "Listen carefully," Rachel spoke softly, but everyone in the now silent cafe could hear her. "I could dislocate your shoulder right now. As a combat medic, I know exactly how to do it, and how to fix it. But that's not who I am anymore. I heal people now. I'd rather help you than hurt you." "Let me go," Spike growled, but the fight had drained from his voice. "First, you're going to promise me something," Rachel continued, maintaining the hold. "You and your club are never going to trouble this cafe or anyone in Millbrook again. Do we understand each other?" The scar-faced biker had managed to get to his feet, but one look at his leader's position made him pause. The youngest member had already backed away, hands raised in surrender. Okay, Spike gasped as Rachel applied slightly more pressure. "We promise." Rachel released him and stepped back, staying ready. Spike sat up, rubbing his shoulder and staring at her with a mixture of fear and something else. "Respect?" "Your men need medical attention." Rachel pointed to the scar-faced biker who was nursing what looked like a sprained wrist. "There's a clinic 3 blocks from here. I suggest you take them there, then leave town and think about what happened today." The sound of police sirens filled the air. Spike looked at Rachel, then at his injured companion. "This isn't over," he muttered, but his heart wasn't in it. "Actually, it is," Rachel replied. "But how it's over, that's up to you. You can leave here tonight as the biker gang that got beaten by a woman, or you can leave thinking about why someone who's seen real combat would risk themselves to protect strangers in a cafe." Officer Martinez was the first through the door, hand on his weapon. He took in the scene, the overturned table, the shaken but unharmed customers, and the 3 subdued bikers. "Everything okay here?" he asked, though his eyes were fixed on Rachel. "Just a small disagreement about proper cafe etiquette," Rachel replied. "I think these gentlemen were just leaving." Martinez looked at the bikers, then back at Rachel. "Want to press charges?" Rachel considered for a moment, studying Spike's face. Behind the anger and embarrassment, she saw something familiar. The look of someone lost, seeking strength in the wrong places. She'd seen it too many times in her trauma center work. "No," she said finally. "I think everyone learned something tonight, didn't we?" Spike met her eyes briefly, then looked away. "Yeah," he mumbled. "We did." As the bikers limped out, followed closely by the police, the other customers burst into applause. Rachel tried to wave it off, but Linda was already announcing that coffee was on the house for everyone. "That was amazing," Jenny exclaimed, still clutching her serving tray. "Are you really a Navy SEAL?" "Was," Rachel corrected gently. "Now I help veterans transition to civilian life. Speaking of which." She turned to look out the window where Spike was sitting on his bike, still not starting it. "I think I might have found some new clients." The video would be uploaded within minutes. Mr. Peterson's shaking phone had captured everything. By morning, it would have hundreds of thousands of views. But what nobody knew yet was that this was just the beginning. The real story, about redemption, community, and finding purpose after combat, was about to unfold in ways nobody could have predicted. Linda slid into the booth across from Rachel, placing a fresh cup of coffee in front of her. You know what's strange? Rachel said, picking up her cup. That felt more important than anything I did overseas. How so? Because this time I wasn't just fighting against something, Rachel replied, watching the police cars pull away. I was fighting for something. For this place, these people. Sometimes the biggest impact we can make is right here at home. Little did Rachel know just how prophetic those words would prove to be. As she sipped her coffee and watched the evening return to normal, the wheels of change were already in motion. The Iron Wolves' reputation for troublemaking was about to transform into something entirely different, and Rachel Cooper's quiet life was about to become a lot more interesting. By midnight, the video had gone viral, surpassing 100,000 views. When the sun rose over Millbrook, it was approaching 1 million. Rachel woke to her phone buzzing non-stop with notifications, messages, and calls from news outlets across the country. Female Navy SEAL takes down 3 bikers while protecting local cafe, read one headline. Combat medic shows true meaning of leave no one behind at small-town cafe, proclaimed another. Rachel ignored them all and headed to work at the trauma center, hoping for a normal day. But normal wasn't in the cards anymore. Have you seen this? Marcus Torres, one of her veteran patients, burst into her office, waving his phone. You're everywhere. My daughter showed me the video this morning. She said you're like Wonder Woman, but better because you're real. It's not that big a deal. Rachel tried to downplay it, organizing files on her desk. Just did what anyone would do. No, Marcus insisted, sitting down across from her. What you did was remind people that we veterans aren't broken. We're still warriors, still protectors. Do you know how many female veterans have been sharing this? You've given them a voice. Before Rachel could respond, her office phone rang. It was Linda from the cafe. Rachel, honey, you need to get down here. Something's happening. Trouble? Rachel was already standing, ready to move. No, just, you should see this for yourself. When Rachel arrived at Crossroads Cafe 15 minutes later, she stopped short in the parking lot. The place was packed, with people actually waiting outside to get in. But what really caught her attention was the group of motorcycles parked in the corner of the lot, not Iron Wolves, but other local motorcycle clubs. Inside, Linda rushed over to her. They've been coming all morning, she explained, gesturing to the bikers scattered throughout the cafe. Different clubs from all over the area, but they're not causing trouble. They're apologizing. A large man in a leather vest stood up from his booth. His patch identified him as the president of the Road Knights MC. Lieutenant Cooper, he called out. Got a minute? Rachel walked over, aware that the whole cafe was watching. The biker extended his hand. Name's Big Mike. I represent several legitimate motorcycle clubs in the area. What happened here last night? That's not what we're about. The Iron Wolves give all bikers a bad name. We wanted you to know that we're here to support this establishment and its customers. That's unexpected, Rachel replied honestly, shaking his hand. There's more, Big Mike continued. We heard you run a trauma center. A lot of our members are vets. We'd like to help. Maybe set up a motorcycle maintenance program for veterans who need transportation. Give them something positive to focus on. Before Rachel could respond, the cafe's door opened again. Everyone turned to look. It was Danny, the youngest of the Iron Wolves from last night, but he wasn't wearing his colors anymore. Lieutenant Cooper, his voice shook slightly. Can I talk to you privately? Rachel nodded and led him to her usual corner booth. The young man couldn't meet her eyes at first. I served in Iraq, he finally said. Army infantry. When I came home, I couldn't fit in anywhere. The Wolves, they felt like brotherhood again, you know? But last night, watching you, you reminded me of my old sergeant, always in control, always protecting others. And now? Rachel asked gently. I want out. But it's not just me. Spike, he's been talking all night. What you said about being a protector instead of a threat, it hit him hard. He's got a sister who's a nurse. She saw the video this morning and called him crying, asked him why he was being a bully. Rachel sat back, processing this information. What are you asking for, Danny? Help, not just for me, for all of us. Most of the wolves were lost. looking for what we had in the service, that sense of purpose. You showed us there's another way to be strong. The cafe had gone quiet, everyone trying to listen in. Rachel was aware of phones still recording, of how this moment might be another turning point. The trauma center opens at 9, she said finally. Come by tomorrow. Bring anyone who wants to change. We'll figure something out. Danny's eyes lit up with hope. Really? Even after what we did? Especially after what you did, because you're proving my point. Real strength isn't about intimidation. It's about having the courage to change. As Danny left wiping his eyes, Big Mike approached again. We'll help, he said simply. Any of the wolves who want to reform, they'll have support from the legitimate clubs. Linda appeared with coffee, beaming. On the house, as always. Betty, you can't keep giving me free coffee. Watch me, Linda grinned. Besides, business is booming. Look around. Rachel did look around. The cafe was full of an unlikely mix. Families with children, bikers from various clubs, veterans who had seen the video and come to show support. Everyone was talking, sharing stories, building connections. Her phone buzzed again, another news outlet wanting an interview. But this time, Rachel didn't ignore it. Maybe it was time to tell this story, not just about one fight in a cafe, but about veterans finding their way home, about redemption, about how sometimes the right kind of strength can transform enemies into allies. Big Mike, she called out. That offer about the motorcycle maintenance program. Let's talk details. As she pulled out a notebook and began planning, Rachel realized that what had started as a simple confrontation was becoming something much bigger. The video had gone viral not just because of the fight, but because people were hungry for this kind of story. One where conflict leads to connection, where enemies become friends, where protecting others matters more than proving you're tough. And this was just the beginning. The next morning, Rachel arrived at the trauma center early. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she wanted to be prepared. At 8:45, the first motorcycle rumbled into the parking lot. It was Spike, alone, without his iron wolves cut. Didn't think you'd be first, Rachel said, meeting him at the door. Couldn't sleep, he admitted, his voice having lost its aggressive edge. Been watching that video over and over, seeing myself, seeing what we'd become. He pulled out his phone, showing Rachel a picture of a young woman in scrubs, maybe mid-20s. This is Claire, my sister. She's an ER nurse in Boston. She called me yesterday morning crying, asked me when I stopped being her hero and became a bully instead. Rachel nodded, unlocking the center's door. That must have been hard to hear. Hardest thing I've ever heard, even harder than when my wife left, saying I'd never change. Spike followed her inside, taking in the photos of veterans on the walls, the resources posted everywhere. Thing is, watching you fight, it wasn't just about the moves. It was how you carried yourself, controlled, purposeful. Like my drill instructor back in basic before I got discharged. You served? Tried to. Washed out of Army basic, medical discharge, bad knee. He looked down, shame evident in his voice. Felt like a failure. Started running with bikes to feel strong again. More motorcycles pulled up outside. Danny arrived with 3 other wolves. Then came Big Mike with some Road Knights members. By 9 o'clock, the center's meeting room was full of leather vests and uncertain faces. So, who wants to go first? Rachel asked, standing at the front. Danny raised his hand. I served in Iraq, 2nd Infantry Division. When I came home, everything felt wrong. Too quiet, too normal. The wolves gave me what I was missing. Brotherhood, adrenaline, purpose. But it was the wrong kind of purpose. Others began sharing. Out of 15 wolves present, 7 were veterans who hadn't completed their service for various reasons. 4 were sons of veterans who'd never found their own way to serve. All of them were looking for something they couldn't quite name. Here's what we're going to do, Rachel announced, pulling out a whiteboard. First, we're starting a motorcycle maintenance program. Big Mike and the Road Knights are offering to teach veterans who need transportation. We'll get help fixing up bikes. You want redemption? Start there. She wrote more on the board. Community service, veteran support, family rebuilding. Second, Those of you who are veterans, we have programs here. Counseling, job training, whatever you need. Those who aren't veterans but want to support them, we'll find a way. Spike stood up. I want to talk to Claire's hospital, tell them what happened. Show them how to be better than I was. Good, Rachel nodded. That's on the list now, too. The meeting ran for 3 hours. By the end, they had a plan. The Iron Wolves would disband, but something new would take its place. A support group for veterans and their families centered around motorcycle maintenance and community service. We need a new name, Danny suggested. Healing Riders, someone called out. Because we're helping others heal while healing ourselves. The energy in the room shifted. These men who had come in looking defeated were sitting straighter, eyes bright with purpose. Rachel recognized that look. She'd seen it in countless veterans who finally found their way back to themselves. Later that afternoon, Rachel returned to Crossroads Cafe. Linda had saved her usual booth, but she wasn't alone. Marcus from the trauma center was waiting with her. Heard about this morning? Marcus said as Rachel sat down. Word spreading fast. You know what this means? That I'll never have a quiet cup of coffee again? No, Marcus laughed. It means we're seeing something new, something important. When that video went viral, everyone focused on the fight. But the real story is what's happening now. Linda brought coffee without being asked. The cafe's becoming quite the spot, she reported. Veterans, bikers, families all mixing together. Had some healing riders in here for lunch. They helped an elderly couple change a flat tire in the parking lot. Rachel's phone buzzed. It was a message from Spike. Claire wants to meet you. Says she wants to learn how to be strong the right way, like her big brother is learning. As Rachel typed a reply, she thought about how much had changed in just 2 days. The viral video had captured a few minutes of action, but the real transformation was happening now, in quiet moments and small choices. We're going to need a bigger center, Marcus mused, watching more motorcycles pull into the cafe parking lot. Word's getting out. Veterans from other towns are calling, asking if we can help start something similar there. One step at a time, Rachel cautioned, but she was smiling. Let's make sure this works here first. Through the window, she watched as Danny helped an older veteran off his motorcycle, treating the man's walker with the same respect he once showed his rifle. Nearby, 2 former wolves were teaching a young veteran's wife how to check her motorcycle's oil. You know what's really changing? Linda asked, sliding into the booth with them. It's not just about veterans finding their way. It's about everyone remembering what community really means. Rachel nodded, thinking about Spike and his sister, about Danny rediscovering his warrior spirit in a positive way, about how a moment of confrontation had opened the door to connection. Sometimes, she said, the strongest thing you can do is show others how to be strong. The sun was setting over Millbrook, casting long shadows across the cafe parking lot. But for the first time in a long time, the shadows didn't feel threatening. They were just reminders that even after the darkest moments, light always finds a way to break through. A week after the cafe incident, Rachel stood in the trauma center parking lot, watching an incredible transformation unfold. What had once been an empty space was now filled with motorcycles, toolboxes, and people working together with purpose. All right, Mrs. Taylor, try starting it now, Danny called out from beneath a restored Honda. The elderly veteran's widow turned the key and the engine roared to life. Her face lit up with joy. My Robert would be so happy, she whispered, tears in her eyes. He always wanted me to learn to ride it. Spike, who now insisted on being called by his real name, Michael, was supervising 3 other healing riders as they taught basic maintenance to a group of young veterans. His sister Claire sat nearby during her lunch break from the local hospital, watching her brother with unmistakable pride. Hey, Lieutenant Cooper, Michael waved Rachel over. Need your help with something important. Sarah joined him at a makeshift desk they'd set up under a canopy. Spread across it were drawings, plans, and a list of names. What's this? Remember Mrs. Taylor's story about her husband's bike? Got me thinking. How many other veteran families out there have bikes sitting in garages collecting dust? Memories just waiting to be brought back to life? Rachel looked at the list. These are all local veterans' families. And active duty, too. We've identified 45 bikes in the county that belong to veterans who've passed or are deployed. We want to restore them all free of charge, get them running for the families, teach them how to maintain them. That's ambitious, Rachel said, but she was already seeing the potential. There's more, Michael continued. Claire came up with the idea for the deployed service members' families. We want to offer free maintenance and riding lessons while their loved ones are away. Give them support, something to focus on. Show them they're not alone. A commotion at the entrance drew their attention. Big Mike was leading a group of Road Knights members in, followed by representatives from 3 other legitimate motorcycle clubs. Each bike was loaded with tools and equipment. Heard you folks could use some help, Big Mike grinned. We've got certified mechanics in every club. Time to put those skills to good use. Rachel watched as the parking lot transformed into an organized workshop. Veterans helping veterans, former troublemakers teaching safety courses, families finding new connections through shared memories of their loved ones. Marcus appeared at her side. Local news is here. They want to talk about Operation Legacy. Operation what now? That's what the kids came up with. Marcus gestured to where Claire and several other young people were painting a banner. They're calling it a revival of veteran legacy through 2 wheels. Pretty sophisticated for millennials. The news crew captured something remarkable that day. Not just people fixing motorcycles, but a community healing itself. They interviewed Mrs. Taylor, who spoke about feeling close to her husband again. They filmed Claire proudly explaining how her brother and his friends were real heroes now, helping other heroes' families. But the most powerful moment came when Danny led a group of healing riders in presenting a restored bike to a deployed Marine's pregnant wife. Your husband's bike is ready for when he comes home, Danny told her. And until then, we'll teach you everything you need to know about it. You're part of our family now. Later that evening, Rachel returned to Crossroads Cafe, exhausted but content. Linda didn't even ask, just brought her coffee and sat down across from her. Saw the news? Linda smiled. Those men, they're different now. Michael was in here for lunch with Claire, paid for a veteran's meal without telling him. Just left a note saying, "Welcome home, brother." Rachel nodded. It's like they finally found what they were looking for all along. Not power over others, but the power to help others. Speaking of help, Linda lowered her voice. Heard about the trouble at Murphy's bar last night. Rachel tensed. No, what happened? A bunch of out-of-town bikers started harassing customers. Before the police could even respond, 6 healing riders showed up. You know what they did? Bought the troublemakers coffee, sat them down, and talked to them about purpose and respect. 3 of those bikers are coming to your center tomorrow. Rachel couldn't help but laugh. They're becoming peacekeepers. Just like you, Linda winked. By the way, someone left something for you. She handed Rachel an envelope. Inside was a child's drawing, a figure in navy dress blues standing beside a motorcycle surrounded by smiling people. At the bottom, in careful handwriting, to Lieutenant Cooper, thank you for showing my big brother how to be a hero again. Love, Claire's daughter, Jenny. Rachel pinned the drawing to the trauma center's bulletin board the next morning. It joined other symbols of transformation, photos of restored bikes, thank you letters from families, news clippings about the Healing Riders community service. But more importantly, it represented something bigger than one viral video or one confrontation in a cafe. It showed how a single moment of standing up for what's right could spark a movement of positive change. As Rachel looked out her office window at the busy parking lot where former enemies now worked side by side helping others, she realized that sometimes the greatest victories don't end with surrender, but with everyone rising together. The success of Operation Legacy caught attention far beyond Millbrook. 1 month after the cafe incident, Rachel found herself facing a new challenge: expansion. Trauma centers from 3 neighboring states were calling, wanting to know how to start their own Healing Riders programs. We've got a situation, Michael announced, walking into Rachel's office early Monday morning. He wasn't alone. With him was a man Rachel recognized from national news, Senator James Wilson, a decorated combat veteran himself. Lieutenant Cooper, The senator extended his hand. Your program has caught the attention of the Veterans Affairs Committee. We're interested in turning this into a national initiative. Rachel gestured for them to sit. That's unexpected. Is it? The senator pulled out his phone. The original video has over 50 million views now, but it's what came after that got my attention. You've turned former troublemakers into community leaders, given veteran families new purpose. You've created a model that works. Michael spoke up. We've been getting calls from motorcycle clubs all over the country. They want to reform, want to help veterans like we're doing. But we need structure, resources. That's where I come in, Senator Wilson explained. I'm proposing a bill to fund veteran motorcycle restoration programs nationwide, based on your Healing Riders model. But we need you to help set it up. Rachel leaned back in her chair. Senator, we're just a small operation. Not anymore, Michael interrupted. Show her, Claire. Claire, who had been quietly working in the corner, brought over her tablet. On it was a map of the country with dozens of glowing points. Each light is a place where people want to start Healing Riders chapters, she explained proudly. I've been helping track the requests. The senator nodded approvingly. This could be revolutionary for veteran support services. Combining motorcycle culture with veteran outreach, it speaks to a demographic we've struggled to reach. Before Rachel could respond, Marcus burst in. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. He turned on the office TV. A national morning show was running a segment titled, From Confrontation to Community, The Healing Riders Revolution. The screen showed clips from their recent bike restoration event, interviews with veteran families, and scenes of former gang members teaching motorcycle safety to kids. This isn't just about bikes anymore, Marcus said. It's about showing people there's always a path to redemption, always a way to serve. The senator stood up. I'll give you time to think about it, but remember, Lieutenant, sometimes the greatest service we can render is showing others how to serve. After he left, Michael stayed behind. Rachel, we need to talk about Jake. Jake? Leader of the Steel Serpents MC from 2 counties over. They're like what we used to be, maybe worse. He came to see me last night. They want to change, but they don't know how. Rachel sighed. Michael, I know we're already stretched thin, but that's why we need this national program. We can't help everyone ourselves, but we can show others how to help themselves. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Danny, looking excited. You're not going to believe this. Remember that group of troubled teens the court ordered to do community service with us? The ones we've been teaching basic maintenance? Yeah. Their probation officer just called. Since they started working with us, not one of them has missed a check-in. 3 have gone back to school, 2 got part-time jobs. They're saying our program works better than traditional intervention. Rachel looked at the map on Claire's tablet, at all those points of light representing communities asking for help. She thought about Jake and his Steel Serpents, about troubled teens finding their way, about veteran families reconnecting through their lost loved ones' motorcycles. Michael, she said finally, get Jake on the phone. Tell him to bring his leadership here tomorrow. And Claire? Yes, Lieutenant? Think you can help me prepare a presentation for the senator? We're going to need to show exactly how this program can work on a national scale. Claire's face lit up. Already on it. Dad and I have been making flowcharts and everything. Just then, Linda arrived from the cafe with coffee and news. You'll never guess who just showed up at Crossroads. 3 members of the old Iron Wolves who left town before all this started. They saw the morning show and drove back from Texas. They're waiting to talk to you. Rachel looked around her office at Michael, once her opponent, now one of her strongest allies. At Claire, whose brother's transformation had inspired her to dream of helping others. At Danny, who'd found his way back to the person he'd always wanted to be. Tell them I'll be there in an hour, she said. And Linda? We're going to need more coffee. Looks like Crossroads Cafe is about to become command central for something bigger than we ever imagined. As Linda left, Michael picked up a framed photo from Rachel's desk, the infamous still from the viral video, the moment she'd stood up to protect a frightened family. You know, he said thoughtfully, when you took us down that night, you actually lifted us up. showed us who we could be. That's the thing about real strength, Rachel replied, watching Claire work on her presentation. It doesn't just win fights, it transforms lives. The afternoon sun streamed through the office window, illuminating the bulletin board now covered with success stories. Each pin, each photo, each thank you note represented someone who'd found their way back to themselves through the simple act of helping others. The road ahead would be challenging, but Rachel knew they were ready. What had started as a confrontation in a small-town cafe was about to become a nationwide movement of veterans helping veterans, of strength through service, of communities healing themselves one bike, one person at a time. And this was still just the beginning. The Millbrook Convention Center had never seen anything quite like this before. 250 motorcycle club members from across the country mixed with veterans, social workers, and family support coordinators, all gathered for the first National Healing Riders Summit. Rachel stood backstage reviewing her notes one last time. Nervous? Michael appeared beside her, wearing a new leather vest with the Healing Riders emblem, a phoenix rising wrapped around a motorcycle wheel with the words "Strength through Service" beneath. Not about speaking, Rachel replied. More about what comes next. Jake's Steel Serpents are here, so are the Night Riders from Arizona, the Coast Warriors from Florida, all former outlaw clubs looking to change. Michael nodded. Just like we did. That's what worries you. Old rivalries. What if they clash? What if old conflicts resurface? Michael smiled, pulling out his phone. He showed Rachel a group chat filled with photos of restored bikes, veteran family stories, and motorcycle safety class graduations from across the country. They're already working together. Old rivalries don't matter much when you're focused on serving others. Senator Wilson stepped up to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the woman who started it all, Lieutenant Rachel Cooper. The applause was thunderous. Rachel walked out, taking in the scene. In the front row, Claire sat with a group of other family members, all wearing Junior Healing Riders t-shirts they'd designed themselves. Behind them, Jake and his Steel Serpents sat next to their former rivals, sharing notes about veteran outreach programs. 2 months ago, Rachel began, I stood up in a cafe because it was the right thing to do. I never expected that moment to lead to this. But looking around this room, I see something remarkable. I see former enemies becoming allies. I see troubled pasts transforming into promising futures. She gestured to the screen behind her where photos began to cycle through. In just 8 weeks, Healing Riders chapters have restored over 200 veteran-owned motorcycles. We've provided transportation to 95 veterans in need. Our youth mentorship program has helped 52 at-risk teens find better paths. The next slides showed before and after photos of motorcycle clubs, but the most important restoration wasn't happening to motorcycles, it was happening to people. Former rival clubs were now working together. Men who once threatened communities were now protecting them. Suddenly, the convention center doors burst open. A group of bikers in unfamiliar colors strode in. The room tensed, but Rachel continued speaking. Like our friends from the Carolina Riders who just arrived. They rode all night to be here because they heard about what we're doing. Welcome, brothers. You're right on time to hear about Phase 2. The tension dissolved as quickly as it had appeared. The newcomers found seats, welcomed by those around them. Phase 2 is about more than just bikes, Rachel continued. It's about creating a national support network. Every Healing Riders chapter will be paired with a trauma center. We're not just fixing motorcycles. We're rebuilding lives, reconnecting families, restoring purpose. She motioned to Danny, who wheeled out a motorcycle covered by a tarp. This bike belonged to Marine Sergeant David Taylor. When he passed, his widow couldn't bear to touch it. Today, thanks to our program, not only is the bike restored, but Mrs. Taylor has become one of our riding instructors for military spouses. Mrs. Taylor herself walked out to thunderous applause wearing her own Healing Riders vest. The elderly woman beamed as she started the perfectly restored motorcycle, its engine purring like new. This is what we're about. Rachel raised her voice over the applause. Not just remembering fallen heroes, but keeping their legacy alive through service to others. The presentation continued with detailed plans for expansion, training programs, and community integration. But the most powerful moment came during the Q&A when a young biker from the Carolina Riders stood up. "I got a confession to make," his voice shook. "We didn't ride all night just to attend. Yesterday, we were supposed to have a territory war with another club, but then someone showed us the video of what happened in that cafe and what came after. We threw down our weapons and rode here instead. We want to learn how to be better." Rachel looked at Michael, who nodded. "Then you're in the right place," she replied, "because every person in this room has a similar story. We're not here to judge your past. We're here to help build your future." The summit continued with breakout sessions led by veteran healing riders. Michael taught conflict resolution. Danny ran a workshop on youth mentorship. Mrs. Taylor shared her experience connecting with military families. Later that evening, as the sun set over the convention center parking lot filled with motorcycles from across the country, Rachel stood with Linda watching it all unfold. "Did you ever imagine that standing up to those bikers would lead to this?" Linda asked, handing Rachel her ever-present coffee. "No," Rachel admitted, "but that's the thing about doing the right thing. You never know how far the ripples will spread." Just then, Claire ran up with exciting news. "Lieutenant Cooper, the Carolina Riders just pledged their clubhouse as a new trauma center, and 3 other clubs are doing the same." Rachel smiled, watching as former enemies shared meals, traded stories, and planned a future built on service rather than conflict. The healing was spreading, and its reach was extending far beyond anything she could have imagined. As the convention center emptied, Rachel found herself back at Crossroads Cafe. Linda was waiting with fresh coffee and wisdom. "You know what the best part is?" Linda said, sliding into the booth. "Every time someone watches that video now, they're not just seeing a fight. They're seeing the moment a movement began." Rachel nodded, watching more motorcycles pull into the parking lot, new faces looking for the same transformation she'd witnessed in Michael and his men. "One cup of coffee at a time," Rachel smiled, raising her mug. "One bike at a time. One life at a time." "To healing," Linda replied, clinking her cup against Rachel's. "To healing," Rachel echoed, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to show that true strength lies not in taking but in giving, not in fighting but in healing, not in standing alone, but in lifting others up. The crisis hit without warning 3 months after the national summit. Rachel's phone lit up at 2 a.m. with an urgent call from Jake, the former Steel Serpents leader. "We've got trouble, Lieutenant. Big trouble. Remember those outlaw clubs we warned you about? The ones who refused to change? They're making their move." Rachel sat up in bed, instantly alert. "What kind of move?" "They targeted Healing Riders chapters. 3 of our bike restoration centers got vandalized last night. They're calling us traitors, saying we've gone soft." Jake's voice tightened. "But that's not the worst part." "What is?" "They're threatening the veteran families we help. Left warning messages at Mrs. Taylor's house. She's scared, Rachel. We all are." Within an hour, Rachel had turned the trauma center into a command post. Michael and Danny coordinated with Healing Riders chapters across 6 states. Reports kept coming in. More vandalism, more threats, all targeting their community service programs. "They're trying to force us back to our old ways," Michael growled, marking another incident on their map. "Want to prove we're still just thugs deep down." "Then we prove them wrong," Rachel replied firmly. "Get every chapter leader on video conference now." As screens lit up around the room showing concerned faces from across the country, Rachel saw the true strength of what they'd built. Former rivals united, ready to protect what they'd created. "Listen up." Rachel's voice carried the authority of her SEAL days. "This is exactly the test we've trained for. They expect us to retaliate with violence, to prove them right about us. Instead, we're going to show them what the Healing Riders really stand for." She laid out the plan. Every restoration center would remain open, but with increased security. Veteran families would have 24-hour protection, not from weapons, but from the constant presence of Healing Riders members doing what they did best, building community. Mrs. Taylor's house was vandalized, Rachel continued. "Tomorrow morning I want 50 bikes in her driveway. Riders fixing her fence, cleaning her yard, teaching motorcycle maintenance to the neighborhood kids. Show them that for every act of destruction, we respond with twice as much creation. The troubled teens in our program are scared, Danny spoke up. Some of their old gang contacts are pressuring them to choose sides. Then we give them something better to choose, Rachel answered. Launch Operation Next Generation ahead of schedule. Get those kids working with veteran families, learning trade skills, earning their own healing rider vests through community service. The next day, something remarkable happened. When the hostile bikers came to intimidate a Healing Riders chapter in Ohio, they found 100 community members forming a peaceful line outside the Restoration Center. Veterans, families, reformed bikers, and local business owners, all wearing Healing Riders support shirts. In Florida, when they tried to threaten a veteran's widow, they found her garage turned into a community gathering spot, with Healing Riders teaching motorcycle safety to neighborhood children, while others repaired bikes for disabled veterans. But the real turning point came at Crossroads Cafe. Linda called Rachel in a panic. A group of outlaw bikers had shown up looking for trouble. By the time Rachel arrived, she found Michael already there, sitting with the hostile bikers, showing them pictures of Claire teaching other kids about motorcycle maintenance. "You think we went soft?" Michael was saying. "Let me tell you about real strength. Last week, I helped a Marine's widow restart her husband's bike for the first time since he died in Afghanistan. Watched her teach their son how to check the oil, just like his dad used to. That took more courage than any fight I've ever been in." Rachel watched from the doorway as the outlaw bikers listened, their expressions changing from scorn to curiosity. One of them, a younger man with fresh prison tattoos, spoke up. "But what about brotherhood? Loyalty?" "Look around." Rachel stepped forward. "This is true brotherhood. Healing Riders from 20 states offered to ride here tonight to protect this cafe. Not to fight, to serve, to show what loyalty really means." Over the next few hours, more arrived, not to confront the outlaws, but to show them a different path. Danny brought some of his teen mentees who proudly demonstrated their mechanical skills. Mrs. Taylor arrived with cookies and stories about how the Healing Riders had helped her heal from her loss. By midnight, 3 of the outlaw bikers had turned in their colors asking how they could join the Healing Riders program. By dawn, their entire chapter was sitting in Rachel's office, filling out trauma center volunteer forms. "You know what really changed their minds?" Michael told Rachel later. "It wasn't fear of our numbers. It wasn't even seeing all the good we do. It was realizing they could be part of something bigger than themselves." The crisis had become a catalyst. Over the next week, chapters that had been targeted responded by expanding their community programs. Every act of vandalism was met with a new restoration project. Every threat was answered with an invitation to join their cause. "You were right," Jake told Rachel during an emergency leadership meeting. "The best way to fight darkness isn't with more darkness. It's by shining a light so bright they can't help but see a better way." As Rachel watched the sunrise over the trauma center, now protected by a peaceful vigil of Healing Riders and community members, she realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from showing them they never had to be enemies at all. Linda brought coffee to the gathered riders, her smile bright despite the early hour. "You know what's amazing? 6 months ago, people used to lock their doors when they heard motorcycles. Now they come out to greet them because they know these riders bring help, not fear." Rachel nodded, watching as more bikes pulled into the parking lot. Former rivals, now brothers in service, their leather vests bearing the promise of strength through healing. "Sometimes," she said, raising her coffee cup to the dawn, "the best way to win a fight is to show others there's something better worth fighting for." Today in Washington, an extraordinary scene unfolded on the National Mall. The news anchor reported over 10,000 motorcycles, led by Lieutenant Rachel Cooper and the Healing Riders, gathered for what they're calling the Restoration Rally. But this was no ordinary motorcycle event. Rachel watched the coverage from Crossroads Cafe, surrounded by the original group that had started it all. The television showed aerial shots of motorcycles arranged to form a massive healing symbol visible from above. What began as a confrontation in a small-town cafe has evolved into one of the most successful veteran support programs in recent history. the reporter continued. The Healing Riders' response to recent threats against their organization has drawn national attention and praise from military leaders and peace advocates alike. Turn it up, Linda called, bringing more coffee to their increasingly crowded corner booth. The cafe was packed with both locals and visiting Healing Riders, who had come to see where it all began. The screen showed Senator Wilson speaking from the Capitol steps. The Healing Riders model represents a revolutionary approach to veteran support and community transformation. Today, I'm proud to announce bipartisan support for the Veterans Restoration and Community Integration Act, which will provide federal funding for similar programs nationwide. Claire, now sporting her own junior Healing Riders vest covered in merit badges for community service, bounced excitedly in her seat. Dad, they're showing your speech next. Sure enough, the coverage cut to Michael standing at the National Mall podium, looking nothing like the intimidating gang leader he'd been just months ago. We used to think strength meant making others fear us, he was saying. Lieutenant Cooper showed us that real strength is using your power to lift others up. Every bike we restore, every veteran we help, every kid we mentor, that's not just community service, that's warrior spirit in action. The diner erupted in cheers as the coverage showed Danny leading a demonstration of their youth mentorship program. Troubled teens working alongside veterans, learning skills while finding purpose. But perhaps most remarkable, the reporter continued, is how the Healing Riders handled the recent threats to their organization. Instead of retaliation, they responded with an expansion of their community programs, turning potential enemies into allies. Rachel's phone buzzed with a message from Jake. You seeing this? Just got word 3 more outlaw clubs requesting meetings. They want to learn about the healing program. Marcus, who had been quietly taking notes beside Rachel, spoke up. You know what's really amazing? The numbers just came in. Since the crisis, veteran suicide rates in communities with Healing Riders chapters have dropped by 26%. We're actually saving lives. The news coverage shifted to Mrs. Taylor, interviewed in her garage-turned-community center. These people, they didn't just fix my husband's motorcycle, she said, wiping tears. They helped me turn my loss into a way to help others. Now I teach other military spouses and widows. We heal together. A new segment began showing the transformation of former gang clubhouses into trauma centers. The reporter interviewed reformed members working alongside the veterans they once intimidated. Look at this, Danny pointed to his phone showing Rachel a social media trend. Healing Effect was trending, with people sharing stories of how the program had changed their communities. National headquarters just called, Michael added. Police departments across the country are reporting decreased gang activity in areas where Healing Riders chapters have opened. They're calling it the positive peer pressure effect. Rachel took it all in. The crowded cafe, the national coverage, the messages pouring in from around the country. She thought back to that evening when she'd stood up to protect a frightened family, never imagining where it would lead. You know what's funny? She said to Linda, who had finally taken a break to sit with them. Everyone keeps talking about how we changed these bikers, but the truth is, we just showed them who they could be if someone believed in them. Speaking of belief, Linda grinned, wait until you see what's coming. The cafe's door opened, and in walked a group Rachel never expected, her old SEAL team, led by her former commanding officer. They were followed by representatives from every major veterans organization in the country. Lieutenant Cooper, her old CO, smiled. We need to talk about taking the healing program global. Turns out other countries have veterans, and troubled bikers too. As the cafe filled with more voices, more stories, more plans for the future, Rachel realized that what had started as a single stand against bullying had become something far more powerful. A movement that proved the strongest forces for change aren't the ones that tear things down, but the ones that build people up. Linda brought another round of coffee for everyone, then paused by Rachel's chair. You know, honey, when you first started coming here, you were trying to leave the warrior life behind. Instead, you showed us all what being a warrior really means. Rachel watched as Claire taught some visiting kids about motorcycle safety, while their parents, former rivals from different clubs, shared stories and plans for new community projects. Sometimes, she replied, The hardest battles we fight are the ones that end in peace. The afternoon sun streamed through the cafe windows, casting a warm glow over the gathered crowd. Veterans and bikers, families and friends, all united in the simple but powerful act of helping others heal. And somewhere in the distance, more motorcycles could be heard approaching, bringing new chapters to this ever-growing story of transformation and hope. The transition to international expansion began in the most unexpected way. Rachel was on a video call with a Healing Riders chapter in California when an unusual request came through from the British Royal Marines. "They're calling it Operation Global Healing," Michael explained, pulling up emails on the trauma center's main screen. "Military units from 12 countries want to adapt our program, but that's not even the surprising part." "What is?" Rachel asked, though she had a feeling she knew what was coming. "Motorcycle clubs, not just American ones anymore. We're getting requests from groups in Europe, Asia, Australia. They've all seen what happened here." The first test case came from Japan. A group of former Bosozoku riders, members of Japanese motorcycle gangs, had reached out after seeing the Healing Riders story go viral. They wanted to work with local veterans and transform their clubs into community support organizations. "But how do we adapt our model to different cultures?" Danny wondered during the planning meeting. "What works in small-town America might not work in Tokyo." Rachel thought about it for a moment. "Then we let them show us how it should work. We provide the framework, they build it their way." Within weeks, Rachel found herself on a video call with Kenji, a former Bosozoku leader turned community organizer. His group had already started working with Japanese self-defense force veterans, combining motorcycle restoration with traditional Japanese values of honor and service. "We call ourselves the Rising Sun Riders," Kenji explained through an interpreter. "Your Phoenix story showed us how to keep our brotherhood while finding a better purpose." The adaptations were fascinating. In Britain, former outlaw bike clubs worked with Royal Marine veterans to create heritage riders, restoring classic British motorcycles while helping veterans transition to civilian life. In Australia, the program incorporated long-distance outback rides as therapy for PTSD veterans. Back at Crossroads Cafe, Rachel shared these developments with Linda over the usual coffee. "Look at this," she showed Linda her tablet. The screen displayed photos from around the world: German bikers helping rebuild a veterans memorial, Brazilian riders organizing motorcycle safety courses for favela youth, South Korean chapters working with military families along the DMZ. "It's like watching light spread," Linda mused. "Each country makes it their own, but the heart stays the same." Claire, who had become the unofficial chronicler of the healing movement, was creating a digital map showing the program's global reach. "Every dot is a different story," she explained proudly, "but they're all connected." The real breakthrough came when a United Nations peacekeeping official contacted them. He had an unusual proposal, using the Healing Riders model in post-conflict zones to help former combatants reintegrate into society. "Think about it," he urged during a conference call. "If you can turn rival biker gangs into community leaders, why not apply the same principles to regions recovering from war?" Rachel found herself working with an increasingly diverse team. Marcus handled cultural adaptation training, Michael coordinated with international motorcycle clubs, Danny developed youth programs that could work across different societies. The most powerful moment came during the first International Healing Riders Summit in Geneva. Former rivals from dozens of countries shared stories of transformation. A British ex-rocker worked alongside a French former gang member to demonstrate their veteran outreach techniques. Japanese Rising Sun Riders taught Australian chapters about incorporating meditation into their program. "You've created something extraordinary," Senator Wilson told Rachel as they watched the summit unfold. "This isn't just veteran support anymore. It's become a model for turning conflict into cooperation." But it was Mrs. Taylor who perhaps understood it best. She had been invited to speak about her experience to an international audience. "When I lost my husband," she told the gathered crowd, "I thought I lost everything. The Healing Riders didn't just restore his motorcycle. They showed me how to turn grief into purpose. Now I see the same thing happening worldwide, people taking their pain and transforming it into power to help others." The movement kept growing in unexpected ways. In Ireland, former paramilitary members worked together through the program, using motorcycle restoration as a way to heal old wounds. In South Africa, the program brought together veterans from opposite sides of old conflicts. One evening, as Rachel watched video feeds from healing programs around the world, she noticed something remarkable. Whether it was in Tokyo or London, Rio or Berlin, the same scene played out. Former enemies working side by side, teaching young people, helping veterans, building community. "You know what this reminds me of?" Michael said, watching footage from a new chapter in Lebanon. "That night in the cafe when you showed us there was another way to be strong." "But this is different," Rachel replied. "Now they're showing each other. Each new chapter learns from the ones before, then adds their own wisdom to share with those who come after." Linda, ever present with her coffee pot, had the last word. "Maybe that's the real legacy of what happened here. Not just showing people a better way, but giving them the tools to show others. It's like a positive infection," Linda added, refilling coffee cups. "Once people see it working, they want to be part of it." The policy experts were fascinated by the cafe itself, how this simple restaurant had become both the birthplace and the heart of a global movement. They took notes as regular customers interacted with Healing Riders members, watching how naturally the program had woven itself into the community's fabric. "You know what's really revolutionary about this?" when a Canadian policymaker observed. "It's showing that the best way to help veterans isn't to treat them as victims who need help, but as warriors who need purpose." Rachel watched as Claire led a group of international youth representatives through their new peer mentorship curriculum. The teenager who had once been afraid of her brother's biker lifestyle was now teaching others how to transform their own communities. "The real policy change," Rachel said finally, "isn't happening in government buildings. It's happening right here, in diners and garages and community centers around the world. We're not just changing laws, we're changing hearts." As the evening wound down, Linda brought one last round of coffee for everyone. The policy experts had long since put away their notebooks, drawn into the genuine warmth and connection they felt in this unexpected cradle of global change. "You know what they don't tell you in all those policy papers?" Linda asked, sitting down with them. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of courage. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up and show others a better way." Through the window, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of hope, its light reflecting off the chrome of dozens of motorcycles parked outside, each one representing a story of transformation, each rider a testament to the power of choosing service over fear, healing over harm, unity over division. Rachel raised her coffee cup in a quiet toast to all the lives changed, all the bridges built, all the healing yet to come. From a simple stand in a small-town cafe to a global movement for peace and transformation, the journey had been extraordinary, but in many ways, it was still just beginning. For wherever there were veterans needing purpose, communities needing healing, or people needing to find their way back to themselves, the Healing Riders would be there, showing that true strength lies not in the power to destroy, but in the courage to heal and help others do the same. The newest challenge facing the Healing Riders emerged from an unexpected quarter. A homeless veteran living under a bridge in Detroit was discovered by local chapter members. But this wasn't just any veteran. "That's Colonel James Wright," Rachel told the emergency leadership meeting at the trauma center. "Former Special Forces, 3 Silver Stars, saved an entire village in Afghanistan. Now he's living on the streets because he couldn't adjust to civilian life." "We've got to do something," Michael insisted. "This isn't just about one veteran anymore. This is showing us a gap in our program." The colonel's situation had exposed a harsh truth. Even with all their success, they were still missing some of the most vulnerable veterans, those who had fallen through every crack, who couldn't even make it to a trauma center or Healing Riders meeting. "I've got an idea," Danny said, pulling up blueprints on the main screen. "We've got all these former clubhouses we've converted. What if we turn them into transitional housing, not just places to sleep, but full rehabilitation centers?" Rachel studied the plans. "We'd need more than just mechanics and mentors. We'd need healthcare providers, counselors, job trainers." Already on it, Marcus interrupted, walking in with a stack of papers. Remember all those professionals who joined Healing Riders chapters? We've got doctors, therapists, social workers, all willing to volunteer. The initiative they developed was called Healing Homes, safe houses for veterans in crisis, staffed by Healing Riders members and professional volunteers. Each one would combine housing with job training, mental health support, and most importantly, a built-in community. But here's the real innovation, Michael explained, pointing to the garage areas in the blueprints. Every healing home will have a working motorcycle restoration shop. Residents can learn trade skills while helping other veterans. They're not just receiving help, they're part of giving it. The first healing home opened in Detroit with Colonel Wright not just as a resident but as a program advisor. His military experience and personal struggle made him uniquely qualified to help design the support system. You know what the hardest part was? The colonel told Rachel during the opening ceremony. Not being homeless, it was feeling useless. This program gives us back our purpose. Within months, healing homes were opening across the country. Each one became more than just a shelter. They were transformation centers where veterans could rebuild their lives while helping others rebuild theirs. But the program soon faced an unexpected challenge. A prominent politician began criticizing the Healing Riders, claiming they were enabling homeless veterans rather than solving the root problems. Rachel found herself defending the program on national television. "We're not enabling, we're empowering," she stated firmly. "Every veteran who comes through our doors becomes part of the solution. They're not just receiving help, they're becoming helpers themselves." The debate sparked something unexpected. Other marginalized groups began reaching out to the Healing Riders, asking about adapting the model for their communities. "We've got former gang members wanting to open healing homes for at-risk youth," Danny reported. "Recovered addicts want to create similar programs for people fighting substance abuse." "It's like watching the next evolution," Linda observed one evening at Crossroads Cafe, as she served coffee to a mixed group of healing home residents and volunteers. "You started by helping bikers become community servants. Now you're helping everyone find their way to serve." The impact was undeniable. Healing home residents weren't just getting off the streets, they were becoming community leaders. Colonel Wright now ran veteran outreach training for police departments. Other graduates were opening small businesses, mentoring youth, and running support programs. "You want to know the real success story?" Marcus asked, showing Rachel the latest statistics. 87% of healing home graduates are now actively involved in community service. They're not just surviving, they're thriving by helping others thrive. The program kept evolving. Healing homes began offering specialized support for female veterans, LGBTQ+ veterans, and veterans with families. Each new challenge they encountered led to new solutions, all built on the same principle: transformation through service. "Remember when we thought this was just about fixing motorcycles?" Michael laughed, watching a group of healing home residents teaching motorcycle maintenance to homeless teens. "It never was," Rachel replied. "The motorcycles were just the bridge. This was always about fixing people by showing them they could help fix others." As the sun set over the latest healing home facility, Rachel watched a new resident arrive, a young veteran looking lost and broken, just as Colonel Wright had been. But this time, he was greeted not by social workers, but by other veterans who had walked his path and found their way back. "Welcome home, brother," Colonel Wright said, extending his hand. "Ready to become part of something bigger than yourself?" The young veteran looked around at the busy workshop where residents and volunteers worked side by side, each person both receiving and giving help. His shoulders straightened slightly as he nodded. "That's what we're really building here," Rachel told Linda later at the cafe. "Not just homes for broken birds, but launching pads for new healers." Linda smiled, watching through the window as Healing Riders members escorted another homeless veteran to safety. From one woman standing up to bullies in a diner to a movement that lifts up the fallen worldwide. Now that's what I call rising from the ashes. Through the cafe window, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of hope, its light reflecting off the chrome of dozens of motorcycles parked outside. each one representing a story of transformation, each rider a testament to the power of choosing service over fear, healing over harm, unity over division. And somewhere in the distance, more motorcycles could be heard approaching, bringing new chapters to this ever-growing story of transformation and hope. For wherever there were veterans needing purpose, communities needing healing, or people needing to find their way back to themselves, the healing riders would be there, showing that true strength lies not in the power to destroy, but in the courage to heal and help others do the same. When the earthquake hit Mexico City, no one expected motorcycle clubs to be among the first responders. But within hours, healing riders chapters from across the Americas were mobilizing. "We've got hundreds of bikes ready to move," Michael reported during an emergency video conference. Healing chapters from Texas to Panama are converging. They can get into areas where bigger vehicles can't reach. Rachel watched the operations map as hundreds of dots moved toward Mexico City, each one representing a healing rider, many of them veterans with disaster response training, all of them ready to help. "This is what we trained for," Danny added, coordinating with international chapters. "Remember those emergency response drills we started doing? They're about to pay off." The first images from Mexico City showed something remarkable. Columns of motorcycles, each bearing the healing rider's emblem, weaving through debris-choked streets carrying medical supplies, water, and emergency equipment. Former gang members who once terrorized communities were now risking their lives to save them. "Look at this," Marcus called out, pointing to his screen. The Rising Sun Riders from Japan had deployed their specialized rescue teams, bringing expertise from their own earthquake experiences. British Heritage Riders were coordinating with Royal Marine veteran units to establish emergency communications. But it was the local transformation that proved most powerful. Mexican motorcycle clubs that had once been rivals were now working together under the healing banner, their knowledge of local streets and communities proving invaluable. "We're getting requests from other disaster zones," Rachel told the emergency response team. "Hurricane in the Philippines, floods in Bangladesh, wildfires in Australia. Everyone wants to know if we can replicate this response model." "Why not?" Michael asked. "We've got chapters worldwide now, each one trained in emergency response, each one ready to serve." The Mexico City operation became a template. Healing riders developed into a unique kind of disaster response force, mobile, agile, and deeply connected to local communities. Their motorcycle skills allowed them to reach places larger organizations couldn't, while their community connections helped them understand where help was needed most. Back at Crossroads Cafe, Linda kept the coffee flowing as Rachel coordinated with international teams. The diner had become an unofficial command center, its walls now covered with maps and emergency response plans. "Just heard from Kenji," Danny announced, rushing in. "Rising Sun Riders are developing a new emergency response training program. They want to teach other chapters their earthquake rescue techniques." Rachel nodded, studying reports from Mexico City. Healing riders weren't just delivering supplies. They were transforming the way communities responded to disaster. Former rivals worked together. Gang members became community heroes, and the motorcycle clubs once feared by neighborhoods were now their strongest protectors. "Lieutenant Cooper," a FEMA official called on the video link, "we need to talk about integrating the healing response model into our standard protocols. What you're doing, it's revolutionary." But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former cartel member in Mexico City, watching healing riders help his community, approached a local chapter. "We have bikes," he said. "We know these streets. Teach us how to help instead of harm." Within weeks, similar requests were coming in from troubled regions worldwide. Groups that had once been part of the problem wanted to become part of the solution. "It's expanding beyond anything we imagined," Marcus observed, showing Rachel the latest data. Healing chapters are becoming first responders in their communities, not just for disasters but for any crisis. The transformation was particularly visible in how communities responded to healing riders now. Where once people had locked their doors at the sound of motorcycles, they now came out to greet them, knowing these riders brought help, not fear. "Remember when we thought standing up to bullies in a diner was a big deal?" Linda asked, watching healing riders load supplies for their next mission. It still was, Rachel replied, because that's what we're still doing, just on a bigger scale, standing up to bigger bullies, disaster, poverty, hopelessness. The Mexico City operation concluded with an unexpected ceremony. Local officials presented healing riders with the city's highest civilian honor. But what moved Rachel most was watching former rival gang members ride together under the healing emblem, their old conflicts forgotten in the shared mission of helping others. "You've shown us something important," the Mexico City mayor said during the ceremony. "That the same spirit that once made people feared can be transformed into a force that makes them heroes." As Rachel watched healing riders from dozens of countries working together, she realized they'd created something unprecedented, a global rapid response force born from the very groups society once considered its biggest problems. "You know what really changed?" Michael asked, standing beside her. "We stopped seeing ourselves as part of the chaos and started seeing ourselves as part of the solution." The evening news showed healing riders helping rebuild homes in Mexico City, former enemies working side by side, each wearing the emblem of the rising phoenix. But now that phoenix meant something more, it represented not just personal transformation but the power to transform disaster into hope, conflict into cooperation, and fear into protection. "Next time," Rachel told her international response team, "we'll be even better prepared." "Because that's what healers do," Linda added, bringing fresh coffee to the planning meeting. "They don't just rise from ashes, they help others rise too." Through the cafe window, Rachel watched as another convoy of bikes headed out, carrying hope and help to those who needed it most. The sound of their engines no longer brought fear. It brought promise. Promise that no matter what disaster struck, no matter what challenges arose, there would always be those willing to ride toward the trouble, ready to help, ready to heal, ready to show that true strength lies in serving others. And somewhere in the distance, more engines could be heard starting up, more chapters joining the call, more former enemies becoming allies in the endless mission of turning pain into purpose, chaos into community, and destruction into renewal. The United Nations General Assembly fell silent as Rachel Cooper stepped up to the podium. 5 years had passed since that fateful night at Crossroads Cafe, and the world was a different place. Behind her stood Michael, Danny, Claire, Colonel Wright, and representatives from Healing Riders chapters spanning 6 continents. On the massive screen behind them, a montage played: restoration projects, disaster responses, lives transformed. "Today we gather not just to celebrate the Healing Riders' achievements," the Secretary General had announced, "but to recognize a fundamental truth about human nature. When we invest in people's capacity to help others, even those society once feared, we create ripples of change that uplift everyone." Rachel looked out over the assembled delegates, her voice steady and clear. 5 years ago, I stood up in a small-town cafe because it was the right thing to do. I never imagined that moment would grow into a movement that would unite people across cultures, borders, and beliefs. The truth is, every one of us has the power to create change. Sometimes it starts with something as simple as standing up for what's right. She paused, letting her words settle. The Healing Riders aren't just about motorcycles or veterans. We're about transformation. We're about proving that no matter how far someone has fallen, they can rise again and help others do the same. The assembly erupted in applause, but Rachel's work wasn't done. That afternoon, she met with global leaders, sharing the blueprint for what they now called the healing model, adapted into education systems, disaster responses, reconciliation programs. Each new chapter carried the same spark that had ignited in that diner years ago. Back at Crossroads Cafe, life had returned to its familiar rhythm. Almost. Linda poured coffee for a group of local healing riders, their patches gleaming with pride. On the wall, a world map showed pins marking every active chapter, each representing thousands of lives transformed. Rachel sat in her usual booth, her notebook open. Across from her, Claire worked on designs for the next International Healing Summit. "What's the theme this year?" Rachel asked. Claire grinned. Rising together, Linda approached with a fresh pot of coffee. You know, honey, people keep asking me if I ever thought my little cafe would be the birthplace of a global movement. What do you tell them? I tell them it always starts small. A cafe, a cup of coffee, one person brave enough to stand up. Then the world changes. Through the window, Rachel saw a new group of riders arrive, some young, some old, but all wearing the same emblem of the rising phoenix. They were greeted with handshakes, laughter, and the unmistakable hum of belonging. Michael, who now served as International Operations Director, joined them with the latest reports. You know what the most beautiful thing is? The program's running itself now. Every person we help becomes someone who helps others. It's like watching healing multiply. Colonel Wright, who had gone from living under a bridge to running veteran outreach programs worldwide, added, "We've got former warlords in Africa working with their old enemies to build schools. Ex-gang members in South America teaching kids conflict resolution. It's not just about bikes anymore. It's about showing people their own power to change things." Danny, heading up youth programs across 30 countries, showed Rachel his tablet. "Check this out. Graduation rates in areas with healing programs are up 40%, crime rates down 35%. But the real number? The friendships formed between people who used to be enemies. That's immeasurable. Remember what you told those bikers that night?" Linda asked, sliding into the booth. Real strength isn't about making others fear you. It's about helping others find their strength. As the sun set over Millbrook, its warm glow reflected on the chrome of countless motorcycles, Rachel closed her notebook. The cafe was full of an unlikely family, former enemies turned brothers, lost souls turned leaders, broken people turned healers. "You know what we really built here?" Rachel said, watching a young veteran being welcomed by a group of riders. "Not just a program or an organization. We built proof that there's always another way, that it's never too late to change your story. That true strength isn't about who you can knock down, but who you can help up." Linda refilled their cups one last time. "To think it all started with one cup of coffee and one person willing to stand up." "No," Rachel corrected gently. "It started with people willing to believe they could be more than their past, willing to trust that their strength could be used for healing instead of hurting. Everything else? That was just the vehicle." Outside, more motorcycles rumbled in, bringing new chapters to the story. But now each rumble carried a different message, not of intimidation, but of hope. Not of fear, but of healing. The phoenix had risen, again and again, in thousands of ways across thousands of lives. As Rachel walked out into the evening air, surrounded by the family she'd found and the movement they'd built together, she realized that every ending was just another beginning. Somewhere another person was taking a stand. Another heart was choosing to heal rather than hurt. Another phoenix was rising from the ashes of what was to embrace what could be. And in a small cafe where it all began, the coffee was always fresh, the welcome was always warm, and the message was always the same. True strength lies not in the power to destroy, but in the courage to heal and help others do the same. Linda watched from the doorway as Rachel joined the riders. "You know what the real miracle is?" She said to no one in particular. "It's not how many lives they've changed." The engine sounds filled the evening air, no longer a threat, but a promise. A promise that wherever there was pain, there would be healing. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click.